This time on PedalBox, we're addressing one of the most common failures on these cars. That's right, we're going to tackle the Front Aero air dam, and I don't have big hopes for getting it working again. We're going to try and address some of the active aero problems that this car has, and those problems include none of it works currently. There's a spoiler on the back and that lifts up to give you a little bit more downforce, and there is an air dam behind this bumper that drops down to improve the efficiency at the front. Now at the moment that air dam is completely jammed. It does nothing. I'm not sure if it's rusted in place, whether the mechanism doesn't work, or if it's just a wiring problem. But one way or another, this air dam catches every single speed bump that we try and bridge the car over. So it is a nightmare, and it means you end up having to hit one side or the other of the wheels into those speed bumps, and that puts an awful lot of additional wear through what is currently some fairly old suspension, and I don't want to aggravate it to the point where we have to start replacing parts of that as well. So we need to get this bumper off, and I'm expecting that to be something of a nightmare. We've got to get underneath the lights, which is why these are currently deployed, and there's a whole bunch of screws across the top, and I don't know how many in the wheel arches, underneath, under where the active aero actually is. I have no idea what's going to be in our way. So this is going to be a learning experience for all of us. Some disassembly later, we've got rid of the headlights and a huge number of bolts out of the bumper. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them that run across the top edge here. There is about a dozen that runs across the bottom edge, although I'm not convinced you actually need to remove those to remove the bumper. That just seems to be a support structure that runs around the edge, so that remains to be seen. You do have to take the headlights out because there are 3 mounting bolts underneath each one, where the little the running light sits under here, so you have to take those out. We've snapped, I think so far, only 2 bolts, which I'm kind of pleased with, but we are basically at a point where we can't do any more with the car on the ground, because we've got to get inside the inner arches, take those out, and get to the bolts that mount the back of the bumper onto the wing and the crash structure. So with the wheel off, we peel back the inner arch liner, and everything's pretty simple. There are 3 bolts that hold it on around the top edge here. I appreciate you can't really see because they are pretty much elbow deep behind this panel, and a couple of more just across the bottom edge here, which, as you can see, we've already taken these 2 out. Now those bolts that run around the bottom edge of this that I thought just held on a retaining brace, they do in fact just hold on a retaining brace. Unfortunately, the inside edge of this retaining brace at the back is meant to attach onto the air dam at the bottom here, and these 2 have quite obviously, as you can see, ripped out. So we definitely did, or you, if you have a functioning one, you definitely do need to take this off, but this is going to need a little bit of straightening out because it's obviously taken a knock at some point. So hopefully if we can straighten this out, we can get the front bumper to sit a little bit more level as well across the bottom edge, which will be excellent. So now we've just got to do the same thing on the other side, and I think at that point, short of disconnecting the indicator, that should be the last thing we need to do before we can disconnect the bumper, which is not actually terrible progress, all things considered. So that is all the bolts that I can tell. I think this should just kind of release now. Okay, no, there's something underneath here in the middle. Oh yeah, there's
up here.
4 bolts, yeah.
And a snail.
Right, second time's the charm. The lights. Spectacular. Okay, now we can see all of this garbage. So now we've got the bumper off, we can actually get in and see the aero mech behind here, which is really convenient because, as hoped, it was not too hard to get into. This appears to be the limiter for this aero section, and this whole thing dips down. Obviously you can see it's very, very floppy, but just behind it there is another big metal strip that goes across from side to side with two little actuators on it, and I'm assuming one side or other here, I can't see which, I'm guessing that side, there is a motor which turns and drops this down. So the cams go down and this drops by what looks like about 2 inches. The question is, why doesn't it drop by 2 inches when we hit the button? But at least we can see it. I think the next thing to do is to get this whole aero section off. You can see this one said active aero across here, and that is long gone. Well, the text is, and this is the strap that was completely fallen off on the other side, which is actually still attached on this side and just keys into one end or other into that little bolt on this side. And then this underside edge acts as the limiter for this front bit to drop down to. So this whole front edge of the aero floats completely freely on the car, is either pushed up against the top edge or it's pulled down at the bottom. So as I say, next up is to try and work out whether or not this motor is loose or if it is an electrical problem. And I don't know which one I'd prefer. I really don't want electrical, but I also don't want the motor to be seized either. So a bit of a Hobson's choice. So we've just taken the inlet off this intercooler, which is looking a little bit ropey, and the motor is actually on this side. It's just down here behind this light, and there is a very, very obvious air gap. If this is why the active aero hasn't been working, I'll be really, really happy, but at the same time, really, really disappointed. I'm tempted actually, before I plug this in, just to give it a test with a battery and see what it does, but that is meant to go on there, hold in, and now it should just work. Well, unfortunately, simply connecting these plugs back together did not solve our problem. We are not that lucky. We've also done a few other tests as well. We got the battery out and tried to connect it up to what I think is clearly the motor powering cables, which is this black and red one that probably can't see from there, that goes directly into the motor. The other 3 wires on this plug go into the gearbox, which I assume are limit switches and positioning sensors up there for when to enable and disable the power to the motor. And we just ran a battery directly onto these cables and the motor did nothing. So either the gearbox is seized, the motor is shorted or seized, we're not sure which. But we also consulted some wiring diagrams just to be sure, and those don't agree with what we are actually looking at. The plug that is on the body side has a little number 3 next to one of the pins, which is fine, apart from the wiring diagram does not list a pin 3 on this connector. It uses pin 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6. It also suggests that pin 5 and 6 should be the ones that you put power into, and pin 5 and 6 go into sensors or wires that go into the gearbox, not directly into the motor. So there is a huge amount of cross communication between what we're looking at and what we're seeing and what we're doing. So the big win that we have discovered is that this whole aero can be accessed and removed without taking the bumper off. Now, we wouldn't necessarily have known that if we hadn't taken the bumper off without a lot of scrabbling underneath, and it wouldn't have been anywhere near as easy to see inside all of this mechanism in the front with the bumper in place. So I'm not too bothered about having taken the bumper off. For the time being, what that means is that this is going to get plugged back up because we don't want to get water and detritus and anything like that. There was a spider's nest in there when we first put it together, and put all of this back together and take some pictures, well, we've taken some pictures, and then consult the wiring loom at a later date to see what we can do with this. It also means that because we can remove this without taking the bumper off, we can pull the whole assembly away and actually take the motor out along with the gearbox. When Chris is here and he's got that benchtop power supply, we can run it and actually dig deeper into this unit itself and hopefully fix it. The main thing that we wanted to achieve with the active aero at the front was not actually fixing it. It was making sure that it wasn't partially deployed or even fully deployed for when you're driving around and you're going over bumps or anything like that. And what we've confirmed is that it is actually completely stowed. It is as high up as you can possibly get it, which is a little bit disappointing because it does mean that it's still going to be hitting all of the speed bumps and everything else. But it now means that we can put all of this back together, put the bumper back on, and anything else we want to do with this, we don't have to get this deep into the front end of the car ever again. What's the whole front of the car back together again, and we can even put it back together slightly more complete than it was because we found this little rubber dust cover. And you might think, well, what does that do? That goes over this little dial down here, which lowers the headlights. You might think, why would you want a little dial that lowers the headlights? These aren't adjustable beams, they're not self-leveling, nothing like that. But headlights are pretty important, and if the motors that actuate these up and down out of the bonnet fail, you can actually manually set them so that they are in their lifted position, which is quite neat. And this little cover, once I put these headlights back up, goes over it and stops it from getting damaged and dirty and generally getting bound up with any dirt that might find its way under the bonnet. So that's quite neat. So for a few hours work getting the front end apart, looking at what we needed and getting it all back together again, I'm pretty satisfied with that.